Pam McEwen is a longtime educator and former certified teacher in the public schools in Wichita, Kansas, who decided to leave the classroom to launch a full-time tutoring center. She actually signed a lease on her building in 2019 and was running tutoring services and assessment services part-time. But when COVID hit, she had even more demand for her tutoring services. And in 2020, she officially resigned from the school district to run her tutoring program full time and ultimately became a flourishing microschool called the Izora Elaine Dean Education Center. So throughout the 2020-2021 school year, the parents of her tutoring students didn't want to leave her even after pandemic remote schooling ended. They absolutely loved the change that they were seeing in their children. They loved to see their children thriving in this very kind of personalized, home-like tutoring environment. And so she worked with parents to help withdraw their children from the public schools to attend her microschool program full time. And it continues to attract families from all over the Wichita area, and she has sort of goals for the future to serve even more students down the road. So Pam McEwen, welcome to the Liberated podcast.
Thank you so much, Carrie, for having me. It's such an honor.
Well, I'm the one who's honored to have you here. I was so thrilled to meet you in person when I was visiting Wichita and seeing the hub of education entrepreneurship that is sprouting in your area. And your center, your microschool, was the first one that I was able to visit and really stood out for me. It's such a warm and welcoming space, very colorful. Many of the classrooms have beautiful artwork and murals and warm lighting, and there's a fish tank, and there's just so much that is, I think, really special about your microschool, that you could see a child just wanting to stay there all day and really become immersed in learning and discovery and feel relaxed and capable of doing so. So it really just stood out to me as such a special place. And I can see why so many parents are gravitating to your program. So I wonder if we can maybe start with why, you decided to create a tutoring center and a microschool. So let's start there, and then we'll kind of work our way backwards and then to the present again.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Carrie. So the idea really kind of originated from my own background, from when I was a child. And I think back to when I was younger and I was experiencing reading difficulty and spelling difficulty. And I was in speech class. A speech path would come and pull me out because I was unable to pronounce all of my letters correctly, like the letter R and the letter S. And I just remember feeling so defeated when I was in elementary school. I remember being probably around second grade. And I was sitting in my second grade classroom and I was watching everyone else get rewarded for being able to pass this weekly spelling test. And I was like, man, I'm never going to be able to pass it. And I'd be at home instead of playing. I'm trying to figure out how to read and spell and write. And I wasn't able to do it. And I remember I felt so bad one day. I was like, I'm going to pass this spelling test. So I came up with this unfortunate idea of thinking about how I could win and pass the spelling test. And I actually remember cheating in class that day. And I had wrote down my little spelling list and I put it under my feet, under my desk. And I was like, okay, question number one, I got that spelled correctly. And number two, I've got that spelled correctly. And I got to word number three. And unfortunately, my teacher was like, what is that under your foot? And I'm like, no. So needless to say, I was able to feel that difference when I was a child. And I remember having this amazing conversation with my grandmother at the time. And she was always asking me, like, how are you doing at school? How are you doing? And, I just remember telling her how I was feeling, like, I can't read, you know what I'm saying? I can't write. All the other kids are able to do this. They're getting stickers and they're getting rewarded because they can do all these amazing things and I can't do them yet. And I remember her really, really taking me under her wing and saying to me, that's okay. You are amazing and you are brilliant, and you may not be able to do it now, but you will be able to do it. And she told me her story of when she was a little girl. And that always stuck with me because she grew up in Oklahoma, and she grew up during a time when girls could only wear dresses. And she told me the story about how when she was little, she loved school so much that she would wake up early, early in the morning. She would get herself dressed. She would get her own breakfast. And she would literally like walk to school for 9 miles to get there in a dress. And then she would walk 9 miles to get back home at the end of her school day. And it was funny. She said her parents would come in, and for a while they would panic because, you know, things were different. Then you can't just call the school and say, hey, it's my child there. But they would come in looking for her, and she'd be long gone. But it was because she loved school that much. So she really just instilled that story in me. And she taught me things that she would learn in school, like she was learning Chickasaw, and I thought that was so interesting. And she was teaching me words from, you know, in Chickasaw language. And it was just amazing to see that through her eyes that anything was possible. And so from that day on, my perspective of education really changed. And I was just thinking to myself, man, if she did that, and I didn't even know how far 9 miles were at the time, but I just knew I was not walking in the dress in the snow. So I knew she was doing a lot better than me. So that just stuck with me. And from there on, you know, she just kind of mentored me throughout my life. And we would always just check in like, how's it going? What are you working on now?
Yes. And so your grandmother is Izora Elaine Dean, and you named your microschool after her, thanks to her influence. And when you walk into the front room of your microschool, there is a collage of pictures with her and her photo to really set the tone for the microschool. Really, this place that is centered around personalized learning and encouragement and support for these children. And so that comes across really clearly, I think, from the moment you walk into your space. But you decided to launch your microschool and become an education entrepreneur later, after you had a glimpse of what was actually happening in the public schools in Wichita. So maybe tell us a little bit more about kind of your background and career in the public schools there.
Mhm. So thanks to her inspiration, I went into education. And I kind of started years ago. I was working for a school district, and I started out in the cafeteria. And it was so funny. I would be in the cafeteria, and my role at the time was cafeteria supervisor. And, you know, there was just something about when I would see these little people come in, and they were just so amazing. And I would see some of them, they would tell me their issues and their problems that they were having in the classrooms. And I was like, really? And then like one little boy specifically came up to me one day, and he was like, well, Miss P, I just feel so terrible. I can't read. I can't do this. And I was like, what? I said, come on over here, sit down. So I sat him down, and here we are reading off the back of the milk carton and the cereal wrappers. And, you know, we would get to the point to where when we would get different cereals in, even in the cafeteria, we would have him start collecting like those different wrappers, and we would just go through and just start reading like what was going on with them. So from there, I was just like, wow, I am really loving this role and really being able to help kids in this way. So fast forward a little bit, I had decided that I was going to do a bachelor in business, but at the same time, I was looking and I was like, well, I have enough credits here where I can go start substitute teaching. So I did. I said, okay, I'm going to go in as a substitute teacher, and I'll continue to work on my bachelor. Well, I just loved going into the classrooms, and I just loved substitute teaching. And I just completely kept my profile all the way open so that I could have as many experiences within substitute teaching as possible. One day I might be the gym teacher, and the next day I might be the drama teacher at a different school. And one day I was teaching, pre-K, and the next day I was at a high school. And I just loved it. I loved getting all of these rich experiences and building relationships with kids along the way. So it was just amazing. So the time came where I needed to figure out, okay, well, your bachelor's in business. So if you're wanting to pursue education full time, you're going to need to, add on a different degree. So I was looking and I was like, man, I'm really enjoying my bachelor in my business class, but at the same time, I want to go into teaching. And it's just so happened that one of the colleges had that I was already at. They had a master's in business administration. So I was like, I'm going to enroll for that. But then one of the teachers that I was substitute for all the time, she was like, you really need to look into this program over here also, and you need to be getting your teaching degree. And so I was like, okay, let me go look into that. So long and behold, I ended up enrolling in both of the programs. And so I worked on getting my MBA at the same time as I worked on getting my MAT, which is Master's in the Art of Teaching, Early Childhood Unified. And it was just an amazing experience for me, because I'd be in my MBA class and I'd be thinking, over in business, maybe if we apply and I bring in some type of teaching, something that I was learning over in my MAT program, and be like, why come we just don't apply this over here in business? This would be amazing if every business learned this technique. And they were like, wow, that is kind of interesting. And then over in my MAT program, I would be thinking, well, why come we just can't have a SWOT analysis for every learner, so that we can identify what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are, what opportunities they have to be successful in education, and what those threats may be to their education. So I really was just kind of taking both of those and just the best of both worlds, I felt at the time, and just kind of blending those together. So I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, and it was a preview for ultimately what would become your role as an education entrepreneur, that bringing together both your passion for education and teaching with your passion for business and that perspective. So before you got there, though, again, before launching your tutoring program in 2019 and then ultimately turning into a full-fledged microschool in 2020, you were working in the public schools. And I wonder what your experience was like there.
Mm-hmm. So as I went on into teaching, I went into the classroom first and worked as a classroom teacher. And as a classroom teacher, you are looking at the data for your classroom, and you're constantly looking at what the kids' needs are and how you're going to push them forward. You're looking at, like in reading, you're looking at, okay, well, what is this learner's words per minute? Where does it need to be? What is their percentage of accuracy? How do I get them where they need to be and move them forward? So that's just an example in reading of some of the data that you're looking at. And so I did that on a regular as a classroom teacher. But after a while, I came out of the classroom directly and worked as an MTSS facilitator or instructional coach. And my role there was to be able to help other classroom teachers and provide professional development to them and all of that. But also, more importantly, to look at the data for each learner and to be able to push forward and help each learner. And something that I was realizing as I was constantly looking at the data, and here I was looking at it looking at it in a deeper lens and on a larger scale, I was noticing that the data, despite a lot of great things that we were doing, the data was nowhere near where it should have been, where we would have wanted it to be. So for instance, that particular year, I remember looking at the data and I was like, man, there's only like about 27 to 28% of learners proficient at each grade level. What do we do to push this forward? And even thinking about learners who graduated that year from high school, there was only about 18% who were proficient and who were on grade level in both reading and math and who were actually graduating with a diploma. And one side note to that I'll also add is that when I was seeing the data from working at this public school level, but then I also, when I finished both of my master's degrees, I also started working as an adjunct instructor for a college. And so some of the same learners that were leaving, as seniors were starting to enter into my college classroom also. And I was like, boy, these are skills that if I'm teaching you about homophones and I'm like, oh no, this was a third grade standard, but here you are in college. So what's happening? Why do we have so many learners falling between the cracks? Why does the data look the way that it does? And it's interesting that the data looks like this prior to COVID-19, which is what inspired me to say in 2019, I've got to do something different. I've got to do something on a grander scale.
Yeah. And so the Izora Elaine Dean Educational Center was born as initially this tutoring center that you offered part-time, kind of after school, in addition to your full-time work at the time in the school district. But then 2020 hit. So tell us what happened in 2020 and the catalyst for you ultimately resigning from your teaching position in the public schools to launch this microschool full-time.
Mm-hmm. So the interesting thing that happened is that, of course, COVID hits, and whereas most businesses, I think, were kind of like, oh no, COVID hit, we're shutting down. We actually kind of had a surge educationally that somewhat happened because parents and everyone realized like there still is this need for our kids to be educated. So what do we do? So our families who were already here and enrolled in like our tutoring program that had happened over the summer, they were like, Ms. P, we don't want to send our kids back to school. So we need you to figure out a way to be able to keep them here and to be able to have their education happen up here. Well, it just so happened that that was during the time that remote learning was happening all around the country. And so thankfully, we were able to apply for a remote learning grant. And out of 77 centers across Kansas that applied, well, actually, I'll take that back. There were a lot of centers that applied, but we were one out of 77 who was actually awarded a grant that helped us to kind of help with that. So we were able to keep our learners here, and they did all of their educational work here. The nice thing is that they were able to see their teachers on the computers, and then we were able to support them. We sat in on conferences, we got data for teachers, we met with teachers and said, hey, here's this learner's data. So it was very interesting. We basically kind of moved from being just a tutoring center that worked around the evenings and the weekends to being open full time. And I had to basically make a decision about what I was going to do at that point.
Yeah. And so how did that work? I mean, what did you decide to do from then on, especially as, even schools reopened, the COVID, the kind of pandemic stage of the COVID subsided, and yet you still had more and more families interested in your services. So what happened then?
Mm-hmm. So the interesting thing that happened then is since we went full time, I went ahead and resigned from my public school job, and I was here at IED full time from that moment on. And that was a good thing because the families and our learners, they needed that extra support. And my family was like, you got to do it, you got to do it. And they were just so encouraging, which was awesome also. And so from there, we finished that school year out with the remote learning, and then Kansas said as a state, like, well, we're not going to do remote learning anymore. And our families were like, but we loved our kids being up here full time. So can you put in place another program that will help our learners to be able to stay up here and do their education through you still full time? And I had no idea what that was going to look like. So I was like, sure. I got to researching and figuring that out. And we came up with another program that was the birth of the program that we have now.
Just incredible. And so how does it work now? How many students do you have? What does the day look like for them? How often do they come and so on?
Mhm. The nice thing about the program is that it allows us to be completely flexible. So we still have a set amount of hours and hours per day and per year, per the state of Kansas, that learners have to, attend and get their education. But because the program is based on it being like a non-accredited private school, which also in Kansas could be set up like a homeschool, that allows our learners to have that flexibility. So we have some learners who come to our center, and then we have some learners who work predominantly from home, and they still receive their lessons and their education and meet with us and do all of that part predominantly through us, and we still hold their educational record. So that means we're still responsible for making sure that they're completely enrolled, that their work is getting done, they're hitting those standards, we're giving them the support that they need, that we are having their grades and all of that done. And so that's the nice thing about the program. I think the thing that's the most important too about the program is that it allows us to actually work with various grade levels too. So we're kindergarten through 11th grade. Again, there's that flexibility between home and IED. We have some learners who are full-time at IED. We have some who are part-time, some who have various health conditions, and this works nice around their schedule. And then I think too, the other thing that's most exciting is our Smart Street Suite part of the program that we kind of put in place. And that's our own curriculum that we've come up with. And our learners have just been taking it and just been, when I say running with it, they have been running with this curriculum. And
Mm.
it's just been amazing to see them enjoying it so much.
And so how many total students do you have, both in person, full-time, part-time, remote? What is sort of the head count at this moment?
So we have around 50.
Amazing. You're on the brink of no longer being a microschool, Pam,
Mhm.
right? Which we'll get to in a minute, kind of what does the future look like? But I wonder, beyond just the flexibility that the IED Center provides and your personalized curriculum that you're offering to your students, what do you see are some of the biggest differences between your model and the public school system?
I would say definitely size plays a difference. And when I say size, I mean even the ability to sit more one-on-one with a learner, or even sit in smaller sessions. The other thing is this too, that I think is amazing, the flexibility in the environment. So even when learners are here at the center, they're able to move and learn all throughout the center. We
Mm.
don't have just one room that we go learn in. We have a lot of different rooms set up. So 1 minute we might be in one room learning one thing, and the next minute we might be in a completely different room learning something completely different. I think that's huge also. Environment plays a huge role when it comes to learning and being able to have that flexibility and knowing that, okay, if I need to go sit in a different area or I need a quieter spot to myself, I'm able to do that. Or if I feel like I'm wanting to go out and learn out in the community, which is another huge aspect for us, is that because of our Smart Street Suite program, we've partnered with a lot of different people in the community to help teach that particular program. So for instance, right now, our learners are learning about entrepreneurship. Well, what better way to learn about entrepreneurship than to go out and talk to entrepreneurs and to visit their businesses and to be able to learn directly from them. And so that's huge also, especially when typically entrepreneurship isn't offered until high school. Our kiddos are getting that early on. They're getting that now in elementary, all the way up through high school. And so because of that, we've got, some of our learners are out at Bath and Body Works during their free days asking questions, like, how do you make your perfume? Because I'm in 5th grade attending IED, and I plan on making my own business also. So the nice thing about it is that their learning just continues and is spreading outside of our walls, and we can't control it and contain it. And we love it that way.
Mm. Yeah, that community partnership piece is a big factor, I think, to your success and what differentiates you in a lot of ways. I would also say those family partnerships, the
Mm,
parents are such a crucial part of the IED center. And the morning that I visited, I saw a mom come in with her son who it seemed like it was just kind of one of those rough days, right? It just the morning hadn't gone so well. And the boy needed his mom to stay with
mhm.
him for a little bit longer. And that was completely acceptable. And like you said, there's all these beautiful little classroom spaces where you can find a spot to just kind of settle into a new routine, a new setting. And it's all very peaceful, very calm, and has that direct connection with the parents. So what do you feel about the parent connection there?
Priceless.
Yeah.
Our parents, this is no joke. I kid you not. IED has such an amazing parent, family. I wouldn't even say just parent, but family community. It's amazing. If someone goes through a divorce up here, we all go through a divorce. If someone is sick, we're all sick. There are times when families will come in and you would think that they would want to hurry and pick their children up and go home because it's the end of the day. They will literally sit in our receptionist area or in another area of IED and just talk for another hour and a half, just amongst all of us, just amongst ourselves about, hey, how was our day? And you hear laughter and you hear people just talking about, just various things that they may be experiencing or got going on in their life. And I love it. A kid to come up and be like, oh, no, my mama not ready yet. She's up there still talking. So the kid go kick their shoes back off and go back and finish talking to the other kids because their parents are up here having such an amazing conversation and they're just relaxing. And what I love about it is that that's like this week, for instance, we had a parent who just came in. This was like yesterday. She came, got her daughter for lunch. They went out to lunch, and then she comes back with this just wonderful, amazing ice cream cake and shares it with all of us here at the center. And what do? We all stop and we all get a chance to just build that relationship and just that community. And we all sit and talk around this ice cream cake and just enjoy it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and it's really a testament, Pam, to the nurturing environment that you've created at the Izora Elaine Dean Education Center, that it is a place where you want to linger, you want to be. It's just really remarkable. And so I want to talk a little bit about your perspectives as an educator who had been, even pre-pandemic, really focused on assessments and proficiency levels according to standardized tests in the Wichita school district and kind of Kansas statewide. And you had an interesting perspective recently as the new NAEP scores have come out, the nation's report card around the idea that there has been this profound learning loss over the past couple of years of education disruption due to COVID. You have a slightly different perspective on that. I wonder if you can share what your thoughts are.
Yes, I do. I do have a different perspective, and just kind of pouring over all of the data. Um, there is, I mean, I'm thinking even here, well, and I guess I'll start with the NAEP scores because you mentioned those. So even prior to the pandemic, our NAEP scores were showing that at the 4th grade and 8th grade levels across the United States, there was only like about 34% somewhere around there of 4th graders who were actually proficient in reading across the United States. And when we looked at 8th graders, it also was about 35% somewhere off in there that were proficient across the United States. And so that helped us to see that prior to COVID, we already had this issue with learners not being proficient in reading. So much so that if we lined up 100 learners, we would choose only 1 out of every 3 who could actually read at their grade level. And that's somewhat disheartening when we think about how long a learner actually goes to school each day and how much time they're actually working on reading. And then here across Kansas, what was interesting and what I found to be really interesting is that prior to the pandemic in 2019, there was only about 36% of learners who were actually proficient in reading from 3rd through 12th grade here in Kansas. And then after the pandemic, the year after that, there was 35%. So what I found to be interesting is a couple of different things. One, the data definitely shows that prior to COVID, we were already having some issues with education, with our educational system, not just here in Kansas, but across America, period. And that some of the things that we were doing as educators and even as a system weren't as beneficial for learners as we were hoping that they would be. The other thing is this, is that based upon those percentages, something that was interesting to me is that prior to the pandemic in Kansas, it was 36% of learners who were not proficient. And after the pandemic, when we had that remote learning piece and all of that, it was only 35%. So somewhere what happened is that 1%, there was a 1% difference. And that difference was that an improvement actually that occurred there after the pandemic with learners across Kansas. So we have to think about if the data improved by about 1.5%, what was the common thing that occurred it to happen? Might it be that because the environment looks different for multiple learners, that impacted our data in a better way? You would think that because the pandemic occurred, that the data would actually get a little bit worse, whereas actually, it actually got a little bit better by about 1.5 percentage points. So that's something that I found to be kind of interesting. And it showed to me too, just the importance of different environments being offered as an option for learners, because maybe environment has a lot to do with how they succeed academically.
Yeah. And one of the things we talked about, Pam, when I visited was that maybe this parent push toward embracing non-traditional education models and schooling alternatives and the kind of growing microschool movement is not so much that parents were concerned about learning loss over the past couple of years, but that for the first time they realized that the baseline proficiency levels pre-COVID were not good, that what was happening in these schools was not serving their children well. And for the first time, they really had an up close look at that. So it wasn't so much that they were moving away from a system that they thought was working well. It was that they were realizing the system never really did work well. And now there are these new alternatives. And thanks to education entrepreneurs like you, more and more to choose from. Is that your sense of what's happening there too?
I would agree with that as well. I think it was unfortunate that COVID-19 happened and that we all witnessed and lived through that. But I think the thing that was a great opportunity for us and parents all around the world was that they were able to take a glimpse into what their child's day would typically look like. And it was a shocker for a lot of families to realize, like, my child is in 5th grade. Why is he struggling to spell the word the? Because I thought everything was okay when I would go to his conferences prior to COVID-19 actually happening. So it was a shocker for a lot of parents when they realized, like, I'm going to have to sit by my child for these 8 hours out of the day instead of going to be able to, instead of going to work to provide for our needs. Now I need to sit here and make sure that he can read this because he can't read this at his level. And I don't think it has been as transparent and as open what the data was looking like prior to COVID-19 until we all got a chance to witness it firsthand and realize, like, whoa, something is wrong. I thought my child was able to actually do this at his or her grade level.
Yeah. So parents really becoming more empowered, getting a sense of what's actually happening in the classrooms, and then now realizing that there are other alternatives. And you're very much a part of that, Pam. So I wonder what the future looks like for the Izora Elaine Dean Educational Center. As I said earlier, you're kind of getting on the cusp of no longer being a microschool, kind of continuing to grow. Is that your hope, your strategy to kind of build where you are into a larger private school that's no longer micro? Are you thinking about scaling elsewhere? What are your plans?
Yes. So we are thinking about some scaling, and it's funny. I don't think we're going to have a choice after a moment, because the other thing that I didn't mention about our community here at IED, our parents and families, is that they fuel a lot of our programs and a lot of our different services. And so they're constantly saying, Ms. P, these people on the west side of town keep asking about IED being over there. So I think at some point we're going to be looking at different spaces and different places to be able to expand. We will continue to expand the microschooling part into bigger numbers, but we'll also continue to offer academic assessments, because we have a lot of families who also need that as well. A lot of homeschooling families who are still looking for that type of support as well. We are also helping other educators to be able to get their microschools up and running, and to be able to structure those, and to be able to be looking at their data and know how to pull those standards in and teach kiddos and all of that kind of stuff. So we've got that in the works. We've got a lot of our own products and subscription boxes that we've come out with. It's interesting because just like last week, I sat down with a parent up here, and she was like, Miss P, you know what we need to come up with? And I love when parents do this. And then she's like, we need to come up with a product that will help kids with this, help this particular learner be able to read more. So we've got some of those products in the works as well to just support learners even more. So moving forward with IED, we'll be growing our numbers. We'll be continuing to help out with those assessments, helping other micro school owners and educators as well, and then putting products and services in place for learners that we know will be supportive and that will help the community.
Oh, I love it. I'm so glad more and more students are going to have access to your incredible programs. How do you approach affordability and accessibility, Pam, to make sure that students who need your services are able to get it?
So with that, we really try to work with each family to see what they are like. We have our rates, of course, like any business does, but we realize that there are going to be families who cannot afford those rates. And so we really work with families more on a one-on-one basis to kind of sit with them individually and to try to meet their needs as much as possible financially. We're thankful that occasionally here and there, we're able to get grants in. We always accept donations, which is amazing. We love to partner with the community as much as possible. But I just know, I think back to my own educational experience, and I hold that when I was younger, the services that were out there, I'm sure we wouldn't have been able to afford a lot of those. And so I take that into consideration when I'm sitting down and I'm working with each family. What are you capable of being able to assist with as far as education for your learner? So that way we're not shutting the door on a learner being able to be in IED, because we want to embrace and love on as many learners as possible and help them as much as possible. And we don't want finances to be the reason why any kiddo feels like they're not going to be able to be successful in education or in life.
So wonderful. So as we begin to wrap up, Pam, you mentioned that one of your growth strategies is helping other educators to launch similar microschool programs. There's a lot of energy right now in the Wichita area and across the country, really, around microschools and learning pods and homeschooling collaboratives and other kinds of non-traditional models. What do you see as sort of the future of education, both in your area as well as nationwide, over the next, say, 5 to 10 years?
Over the next 5 to 10 years, I can see that the micro schools, the learning pods, homeschooling is going to continue to grow. It's going to continue to grow, probably at astronomical rates, and it's going to continue to boom. And the reason for that is because in most cases, in all cases, we're wanting to put learners first. And we're wanting to be able to create the program around the needs of the learner and not vice versa. So I think that's what's happening a lot here in the Wichita area. We're realizing like, oh, this learner has this set of needs, or this group of learner has this set of needs. How can we address the needs of the learner and still help them to be able to meet their educational standards? And so I think moving forward, we will continue to put the learner and their needs first, and to realize that that's what's most important. We have to be able to educate learners based upon their needs, and to be able to value the whole child, and put that first and then go from there. So I am predicting that it's just going to continue to surge.
Oh, well, I hope so. I think providing these opportunities for more learners to have that sort of individualized whole child focus is really beneficial to them and their intellectual and personal well-being and development. So, Pam, if my listeners want to get in touch with you to find and follow your work, what is the best way for them to do that?
Absolutely. So they can visit our website at www.iededucationalcenter.com, or they also can follow us on Facebook, the Izora Elaine Dean Educational Center. If they just put in IED is in the number 4, IED is for me, they'll be able to find us there.
Pam McEwen, thank you again for being on the Liberated podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Carrie. I really appreciate you.